My foster family spent 5 years fattening me up as a life insurance policy, so I disappeared before they could collect. I was 17 when I found the policy with my name on it, tucked between cookbooks in the Holloway's kitchen. $2 million. Death benefit. Insured, Daniel Aaron Fletcher. That's me. Beneficiary, Leonard and Judith Holloway, my foster parents. The paper felt greasy in my hands, or maybe that was just my fingers, always slick from the butter they spread on everything they fed me. I stood there in the early morning darkness, my stomach churning, and for the first time in 5 years, I understood why Judith always had that look in her eyes when she watched me eat. Not love, not even affection, just cold calculation, like someone watching their investment mature. I slid the document back exactly where I'd found it, careful not to disturb the dust pattern around it, and walked back to my room on legs that felt hollow despite weighing over 300 pounds. My heart hammered against ribs buried under layers of flesh they'd carefully, methodically built around me since I was 12 years old. The Holloways took me in during the winter I turned 12. I'd been bouncing through the Illinois foster system for 3 years after my mom overdosed, and I was the kind of kid nobody wanted anymore. Too old for the couples seeking babies, too angry for the families wanting grateful children. I'd been in 7 homes before the Holloways, each one a different flavor of neglect or outright cruelty. The Johnsons had kept me in the basement, said I was too disruptive for their real children. The Abbotts had used me as free labor for their landscaping business, working me 12-hour days during summer. The Reeves had simply forgotten I existed, spending their foster care checks on themselves while I wore the same 3 outfits for 6 months. By the time I met the Holloways, I'd learned to expect nothing and trust no one. When Leonard and Judith arrived at the group home in their clean sedan, wearing their clean clothes and their clean smiles, I didn't trust them. But I was tired. So tired of fighting, of moving, of hoping for something better only to have it ripped away. Judith crouched down to my eye level in the common room of the group home, and I remember how her perfume smelled expensive, floral, but not overwhelming. "We've been looking for a boy just like you, Daniel," she said, her voice soft and warm. "We want to give you a real home, a forever home." Leonard nodded. His hand on her shoulder, both of them radiating the kind of warmth I hadn't felt since before my mom got sick. The social worker, Mrs. Kimball, practically pushed me into their car that afternoon. She'd been my caseworker for 2 years, had seen me spiral through placement after placement, and I think she was desperate for a success story. "This is a good family," she'd whispered as she helped me pack my few belongings into a trash bag. "They're established, financially stable, no other children to compete with. Don't mess this up, Daniel. This might be your last chance." I was 12 years old, being told this was my last chance at having a family. The weight of that settled on my shoulders like a physical thing. The first few months felt like a dream, the kind where everything is perfect, but you know you're going to wake up. They had a real house in Oak Ridge, a quiet suburb with tree-lined streets and neighbors who actually waved from their lawns instead of staring suspiciously. My room had a bed with a thick mattress, not the thin institutional ones I'd grown used to, and a desk where I could do homework, and a closet with actual space for clothes. Judith cooked 3 meals a day, proper meals with vegetables and meat and dessert, everything arranged on actual plates instead of paper or plastic. Leonard helped me with homework at the kitchen table every evening, patient when I struggled with algebra, celebrating when I finally understood a concept. They asked about my day at school. They took me to a doctor for a complete physical, got me prescriptions for anxiety medication that actually helped me sleep through the night. They bought me clothes that fit properly, shoes that weren't falling apart. I started to believe Mrs. Kimball had been right. I started to let my guard down, to think maybe I'd finally found what I'd been searching for. That's when the food really started. Not all at once, they were too smart for that. Just gradual increases that seemed normal, even caring. Bigger portions at dinner. Second helpings that Judith insisted on, standing at the stove with the serving spoon, waiting until I held out my plate. Snacks between meals, bowls of chips and cookies left on the coffee table while I watched TV. Late-night treats, Judith knocking on my door with warm brownies or ice cream sundaes. "You're too skinny," she would say. And at first I believed her because I had been thin, undernourished from years of inadequate care. Growing boys need fuel. You need to build up your strength. And I ate because I was hungry, always hungry after years of food insecurity, and because refusing felt like rejecting their love. Every bite felt like I was proving I was grateful, that I deserved their kindness. I didn't know I was literally eating myself to death for their profit. By the time I turned 13, I'd gained 40 pounds. Judith beamed when she took me shopping for new clothes, exclaiming over how the old ones didn't fit anymore. "Look how healthy you're getting," she'd say, squeezing my filling cheeks with genuine seeming affection. "You were just skin and bones when you came to us. Now you look like a real boy." Leonard started talking about life insurance then, casually, over dinner one night, how important it was to protect family members. How he'd taken out policies on both himself and Judith years ago. "We should get one for Daniel too," he told her, cutting into his steak with deliberate precision. "Just in case. You never know what could happen. Accidents, illnesses. We'd want to make sure he's taken care of, that there's money for college if something happened to us, or to him. Judith had nodded thoughtfully, like this was a completely normal conversation to have about your 13-year-old foster child. I didn't think anything of it then. I was just relieved to be somewhere stable, somewhere I wasn't being screamed at or ignored or worse. I didn't notice how Judith started tracking everything I ate in a small notebook she kept in her purse, writing down meals and portion sizes with scientific precision. I didn't notice how they'd exchanged glances when I finished entire pizzas by myself, small smiles of satisfaction. I didn't notice that they never encouraged me to play outside, to join sports teams, to be active like other kids my age. I was too busy trying to be the son they wanted, too busy trying to deserve this second chance at having a family. The scale in the bathroom became a weekly ritual. Judith would have me step on it every Saturday morning, recording the number in a separate notebook she kept in their bedroom. "We need to track your growth," she'd explain. "Make sure you're developing properly." But proper development doesn't involve gaining 10 pounds a month. Proper development doesn't involve parents who look disappointed when the number doesn't increase enough. 14 came and went in a blur of increasing isolation and expanding waistlines. I was up to 200 pounds by my 14th birthday, and my old friends from school had drifted away. Part of it was my fault. I'd become quiet and withdrawn, embarrassed by my size, uncomfortable in my own skin. But part of it was the Holloways actively discouraging friendships. "Those boys are a bad influence," Leonard would say whenever someone called. "You don't need to waste your time with kids who will just get you in trouble." They discouraged sports with concerns about injury. Video games were limited because they were too stimulating. Any activity that might burn calories was gently redirected towards sedentary alternatives. "You need to focus on your studies," Leonard would say, guiding me back to the couch with another bag of chips. Another soda. "Education is what matters. Everything else is just distraction." Judith packed my lunches with triple sandwiches, candy bars, full sugar sodas, bags of cookies. More food than any teenager could reasonably eat, but she'd look hurt if I brought anything back. "I worked so hard on that for you," she'd say, her voice cracking just enough to make me feel guilty. "I just want you to be healthy and strong. Don't you know how much we love you?" So I ate and ate and ate. The other kids at school started calling me names. Fatass, Butterball, Whale. I learned to eat lunch in the bathroom stall, hiding from their mockery, crying while I forced down sandwich after sandwich because disappointing Judith felt worse than any bullying. The school counselor called me in once, concerned about my weight gain, but Leonard had a meeting with the principal, and suddenly the counselor never mentioned it again. I wonder now what he told them, what lies he spun to make my obvious health crisis seem like loving parental care. The doctor they took me to never mentioned my weight gain either, which should have been a red flag visible from space. Dr. Rourke had an office in a strip mall 40 minutes from our house, far enough that we never ran into anyone we knew. He was older, his practice shabby and outdated, the kind of place that took cash and didn't ask questions. Every few months, Leonard would take me there for checkups that consisted of Dr. Rourke taking my blood pressure, listening to my heart, and writing new prescriptions. The medications changed occasionally, different colored pills that Judith would line up next to my breakfast plate. "For your anxiety," she'd explain, "for your focus, for your health." Years later, I'd learned they were appetite stimulants, metabolism suppressants, drugs that made my body store fat like I was preparing for hibernation. Dr. Rourke was being paid to slowly poison me, to make me into the perfect candidate for an early death that would look natural on paper. At 15, I couldn't run anymore, couldn't climb stairs without breathing hard, my heart pounding like it was trying to escape my chest. My knees ached constantly, the joints grinding under weight they were never meant to carry. I'd wake up sometimes in the middle of the night, gasping for air, and Judith would be there with water and kind words and another pill. "Sleep apnea," she'd say. "Perfectly normal for boys your size. This will help." Nothing about my size was normal. Nothing about any of this was normal. But I was 15, and I had nowhere else to go, and some part of me still desperately wanted to believe they loved me, that this was what family looked like, that I was the problem, not them. Leonard bought me an expensive laptop and a premium gaming chair, top-of-the-line equipment that encouraged me to spend hours sitting in one position. "You deserve to relax," he'd say, setting up my computer in my room. "You work so hard at school, everyone needs downtime." Except I didn't work hard at school anymore. My grades had started slipping because I couldn't concentrate through the brain fog that seemed to settle over me more and more. The medication I understand now, though then they told me it was just teenage hormones, just normal adolescent struggles. My teachers expressed concern, called home. The Holloways would nod seriously, promise to help me study, then do nothing except feed me more. Report cards came. I was failing 3 classes. Leonard sighed and said, "Some kids just aren't academic. That's okay. We love you anyway." The resignation in his voice should have terrified me. They threw me a big 16th birthday party, just the 3 of us, no friends invited because I didn't have any friends left, but Judith had gone all out. Decorations covered the dining room, balloons and streamers and a banner that said, "Sweet 16." She'd made this enormous cake, 4 layers of chocolate with buttercream frosting, my name written in blue icing. It must have had 5,000 calories per slice. "Make a wish," she'd said, lighting the 16 candles with a smile that I can now recognize as predatory. I'd wished to feel normal again, to feel like myself. I couldn't remember anymore what that had felt like, who I had been before they'd started reshaping me into their profit margin. I ate 3 slices while they watched and smiled and took photos, documenting my destruction with the same enthusiasm other parents documented achievement. The first real crack in my denial came 6 months before I found the policy. I'd gotten sick, really sick, with what Dr. Rourke diagnosed as pneumonia. High fever that spiked to 104, couldn't breathe right without feeling like my lungs were full of concrete, scary enough that even the Holloways seemed concerned. They kept me home from school for 2 weeks. I lost 15 pounds because I couldn't keep food down, could barely manage water and crackers. My body was so grateful for the reprieve that even through the illness, I felt somehow lighter, clearer. And during those 2 weeks, I heard them fighting for the first time. Their bedroom was next to mine, and the walls were thin enough that sound carried easily. Late one night, maybe 3 a.m., Judith's voice cut through my fever dreams. "He's getting too light," she hissed, angry in a way I'd never heard her. "We need him at least 320, Leonard. The policy specifies natural causes, and anyone investigating will look at his weight. He can't be too thin or too heavy. There's a window." Leonard's response was muffled, but I caught fragments. "Calibrate the dosage. Can't make it obvious. Patience. Almost there." I'd lain there in my sweat-soaked sheets, my heart pounding with more than just fever, telling myself I'd misheard, that I was delirious, that my mind was playing tricks. But something ancient and animal in my brain started screaming warnings. Danger, predator, run. I was too weak to run, too sick to do anything but lie there and pretend to sleep when Judith came in to check on me, her hand cool on my forehead, her voice soft with false concern. "Poor baby," she'd whispered. "You'll feel better soon. Then we'll get you back to normal." Normal meant feeding me to death. Normal meant medicating me into compliance. Normal meant waiting for my heart to give out, or my liver to fail, or my body to just collapse under the weight they'd built around it. When I recovered, Judith's feeding campaign intensified with an urgency that felt almost frantic. Bigger portions that filled the entire plate. More frequent meals, breakfast, snack, lunch, snack, dinner, dessert, late-night snack. Less patience for my refusal or claims that I was full. "You lost so much weight being sick," she'd say, her voice sharp with frustration. "We need to build you back up. You're wasting away." I was 285 pounds. I was not wasting away. But I ate because saying no meant hours-long lectures about gratitude, about how much they sacrificed for me, about how other foster kids would be grateful for what I had. The manipulation was expert, refined over years of practice with other victims I didn't yet know about. I started to notice other things with my newly cleared mind. The way Leonard took out that notebook from the locked drawer in his study every Wednesday night, like clockwork, spent hours with a calculator and papers spread across his desk. I watched from the hallway once, careful to stay in shadow, and saw him writing numbers, drawing charts, doing calculations that seemed far too intense for simple household budgeting. The way Judith measured my waist every month with a fabric tape measure, recording the numbers in her tracking notebook with either satisfaction or frustration, depending on whether I'd gained enough. The medical bills I glimpsed in the trash one day when taking out garbage, showing prescriptions for medications I'd never seen before, drugs with names I didn't recognize and prices that seemed excessive. The way they'd both tense up visibly when I mentioned feeling unwell, then relax with obvious relief when I said I was fine. The strange visitors who came occasionally, maybe once every few months. Men in expensive suits who'd closet themselves with Leonard in his study for hours, speaking in low voices that never quite carried to where I might overhear. Once, I'd crept close enough to the door to hear fragments of conversation. "Accidental death won't pay out the full amount," one man was saying. "Natural causes only. Heart attack, stroke, diabetes complications. Those all justify the payout. But you need existing conditions, documented health problems." Leonard's voice was calm, assured. "He's been seeing Dr. Rourke regularly. Everything's documented. High blood pressure, pre-diabetes, joint problems. The kid's a heart attack waiting to happen." They were talking about me like I was livestock, like I was a commodity instead of a person. I'd backed away from the door slowly, my heart thundering, telling myself I was paranoid, that foster care had damaged me, made me suspicious of kindness. But I couldn't stop noticing, couldn't stop the growing dread that something was fundamentally wrong with my situation, with this family, with everything I'd convinced myself was normal. I started pretending to take my medications, the nightly handful of pills Judith would present with a glass of water. I'd gotten good at hiding pills under my tongue, swallowing water dramatically, then spitting the pills out into my hand when she wasn't looking. I'd flush them down the toilet later, watching them swirl away with a mixture of fear and relief. Within a week, my mind felt clearer than it had in years. The constant fog lifted like curtains being drawn back. The exhaustion that had plagued me for years eased slightly. My thoughts became sharper, faster. I started to understand just how much they'd been drugging me, how completely they'd been controlling every aspect of my existence. I started eating less too, claiming I wasn't hungry, pushing food around my plate to make it look like I'd eaten more than I had. Judith's eyes would narrow, and she'd sit across from me at the table, watching with that calculating expression until I ate more. "You're worrying me, Daniel," she'd say, her voice dripping with false maternal concern. "You know what Dr. Rourke said about maintaining your health. You need proper nutrition. You need to eat." But I also started forcing myself to throw up in the bathroom afterward, leaning over the toilet and making myself gag until everything came back up. It was dangerous, unhealthy, creating new problems even as I tried to escape old ones. But something had shifted in me. That conversation I'd overheard during my pneumonia had planted a seed of terror that was now sprouting into full-blown panic. Then came that morning I couldn't sleep, anxious and wired despite it being 5 a.m., and I crept downstairs for water. The house was silent, except for Leonard's snoring echoing down from upstairs. I'd walked into the kitchen without turning on lights, had been reaching for a glass from the cabinet when I'd noticed another cabinet hanging slightly open, the one where Judith kept her cookbooks, recipes she never actually used because she cooked the same fattening meals on rotation: fried chicken, mac and cheese, pot roast with potatoes, all swimming in butter and cream. Something made me look inside. Maybe intuition. Maybe the paranoia that had been building for months, finally crystallizing into action. Maybe just dumb luck. I'd found the insurance policy between joy of cooking and some stained binder of casserole recipes, the paper crisp and official. $2 million, death benefit. Insured, Daniel Aaron Fletcher. Beneficiary, Leonard and Judith Holloway. Date of purchase, February 15th, 5 years ago. 1 month after they'd taken me in from the group home. I'd stood there reading it over and over, my hands shaking so badly the paper rattled as the full horror of my situation crystallized with devastating clarity. They'd never wanted a son. They'd wanted an investment, a slow-growing, fattening investment that would pay out when I died. Every kind word had been manipulation. Every meal had been adding dollars to their eventual payout. Every medication had been bringing me closer to an early grave. They'd taken a vulnerable 12-year-old who just wanted to be loved and turned him into a walking life insurance policy worth $2 million. And now I weighed 302 pounds, my body a ticking time bomb of health problems, and they were getting impatient for me to die. I went back to my room and didn't sleep. Couldn't sleep. My mind was racing, connecting dots I'd been too naive or too desperate to connect before. The other foster children they must have had, there had to be others. This scheme was too elaborate, too well planned to be their first attempt. The way they'd isolated me so completely, cutting me off from anyone who might question what was happening. The specific way they'd chosen foods and medications to maximize weight gain while minimizing my awareness of what was happening. The timing of everything. How they'd waited until I was old enough that my death wouldn't trigger automatic investigation, but young enough that I was still under their control. It was brilliant in its evil, systematic, patient. They'd played a 5-year-long game with my life as the stake, and I'd been too broken and desperate to see it until now. I was 17 years old, morbidly obese, probably with health problems I didn't even know about yet, and I had no one to turn to. No friends, they'd made sure of that. No family. My mom was dead, my father unknown, extended family non-existent or unwilling to take me in. Mrs. Kimball from social services had retired 2 years ago, replaced by some overworked guy named Mr. Phillips, who only did check-ins every 6 months and seemed to actively avoid making waves. The last time he'd visited 3 months ago, the Holloways had prepared for it like a stage production. Judith had made a healthy dinner with vegetables. Leonard had coached me on what to say. Everything's fine. They're great. I'm happy here. And I'd said it because what else was I supposed to say? What evidence did I have except my own suspicions? The Holloways had created the perfect facade. Loving, concerned parents, troubled but cared-for child. Who would believe me if I tried to speak up? I started planning my escape that same day, carefully, methodically, knowing I'd only get one chance. First, I needed money. I had none of my own. No job, because the Holloways said I should focus on school even though my grades were terrible. No allowance because we provide everything you need. I started searching their bedroom when they left for their weekly grocery shopping trip every Thursday. Found $300 in cash tucked in Leonard's sock drawer underneath his neatly rolled dress socks. Not enough to get far, but a start. I took $50, praying they wouldn't notice, wouldn't count. Started hiding it in a hole I'd torn in my mattress, in the corner where the fabric had started to fray from my weight. Each week, I took a little more. $10 here, $20 there. Never enough that they'd immediately notice, but enough that it started adding up. Next, I needed identification. My birth certificate and social security card were in Leonard's study, locked in a filing cabinet behind his desk. I spent 2 weeks watching him, learning his routine, figuring out his patterns. He kept the key on his keyring during the day, but at night, he'd empty his pockets into a bowl on his dresser. I waited for a night when I heard him showering, crept into their bedroom with my heart hammering, and grabbed the small silver key. Got into his study, Opened the cabinet with hands that shook so badly I could barely fit the key in the lock, found my documents in a folder labeled with my name. Photographed everything with the cheap phone they'd given me, the one without data, only to be used for emergencies. Downloaded the photos to the laptop Leonard had bought me. Later, I'd print copies at the school library, using a printer card I'd stolen from another student's backpack. But gathering resources wasn't enough. I needed a destination, a plan beyond just running into the night. I spent hours at the school library after classes, researching while I was supposed to be doing homework. Found stories about foster care failures, about kids who'd disappeared into the system and never been found, about insurance fraud cases, though none quite like mine, about medical abuse, about the health conditions I probably had. I read everything I could about morbid obesity, about the ways it destroys the body. High blood pressure, I definitely had that. Could feel it in the headaches that plagued me. Diabetes, probably, given my diet. Joint problems, my knees felt like broken glass grinding together with every step. Sleep apnea, I woke up gasping most nights. I was a walking time bomb of health crises. And the Holloways had built me that way deliberately, methodically, patiently. They were probably getting impatient now, wondering when I'd conveniently die so they could collect. I decided on Chicago as my destination. Big enough to disappear in, to blend into the crowds of homeless and runaway youth that every major city accumulates. Close enough to reach on limited resources, only about 40 miles from Oak Ridge, doable by bus or even hitchhiking if I got desperate. Far enough from the suburb that the Holloways might not find me immediately, might waste time searching locally first. The city had shelters, services for runaway youth, places I could hide while I figured out what came next. I'd take a bus if I could, use the cash I'd been stealing, find a shelter, find someone who would listen, who would believe me. Figure out the rest from there. It wasn't a great plan. It had 1,000 holes and 1,000,000 ways it could fail. But it was something. And something was better than staying here, eating their food, taking their pills, waiting to die for their profit. Then everything accelerated in a way that made my blood run cold. I came home from school one day in early March to find that Leonard had changed the locks on my bedroom door, from the outside. There was a new deadbolt installed, shiny and silver, positioned where it could only be operated from the hallway. "For your safety," he'd said when I stood there staring at it, his smile not reaching his eyes. "We've had some break-ins in the neighborhood lately. Want to make sure everyone's secure at night." But the lock was only on the outside. I could still open my door from inside. But now they could lock me in whenever they wanted. The message was clear even if the excuse was flimsy. They knew something. Maybe they'd noticed the missing money and counted their cash. Maybe they'd sensed my changed attitude, my resistance to their feeding routine. Maybe they were just moving to the next phase of their plan, whatever that was. That night, I heard them in the hallway outside my room, their voices low, but not low enough. The walls in this house had always been thin, something I'd learned to be grateful for. "He's been losing weight," Judith said, and I could hear the anger vibrating underneath the words. "Not much, but I've noticed. And I've been checking. He's not taking the pills. I found 3 of them stuck to the bathroom sink. He's been spitting them out." My heart stopped. I lay in bed absolutely still, barely breathing, every sense straining to hear more. Leonard's response was sharp, frustrated. "Then we adjust the plan. Put it in his food. He has to eat. He can avoid the pills, but he can't avoid eating." There was a pause. "How long?" Judith asked, and I could picture her in the hallway, arms crossed, that calculating expression on her face. 2 months, Leonard said. 3 at most. The policy's fully mature. We've waited long enough. 5 years of investment. 5 years of feeding this ungrateful little shit. It's time for our return. 2 months, maybe 3. That's how long I had to live if I stayed in this house. They were done being patient, done waiting for nature to take its course. They were going to actively kill me now and make it look like the natural consequence of obesity they'd spent 5 years creating. I had to leave immediately, not in a week when I'd saved more money, not in a few days when I'd worked out more details of my plan. Now, tonight. Before they started putting whatever they were planning into my food, before they locked me in my room at night and I became a complete prisoner, before I ended up like the other foster children they'd surely done this to, dead of natural causes while they cashed checks and shopped for their next victim. I waited until I heard their bedroom door close, heard the house settle into nighttime quiet, heard Leonard's distinctive snoring start around 11 p.m. It always took him about 20 minutes to fall asleep, and then he'd snore loud enough to wake the dead, except apparently not loud enough to wake himself. I moved quietly around my room, packing a backpack with the essentials I'd been gathering. The cash, now totaling about $200, copies of my documents, a change of clothes, the laptop even though it was heavy, the phone charger, a water bottle I filled in my bathroom sink, some granola bars I'd been hoarding. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely zip the backpack closed. This was it. No second chances. If they caught me, I didn't know what they'd do, but I knew it would be bad. I crept to my door and listened, my ear pressed against the wood. Silence except for Leonard's snoring. I turned the knob slowly, carefully, thanking every god I didn't believe in that they hadn't locked it yet tonight. Maybe they'd decided to wait until they'd made their other preparations. Maybe they'd gotten lazy. Maybe I was just incredibly lucky. The door opened with a soft click that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet house. The hallway was dark, lit only by a nightlight near the bathroom. I moved toward the stairs, each step feeling like it echoed through the entire house. My weight made stealth nearly impossible. The floorboards creaked under my feet no matter how carefully I placed them. My breathing sounded too loud, too fast. But I kept moving, one foot in front of the other, my entire body vibrating with adrenaline and terror. I made it to the first floor. The living room was dark. The kitchen beyond it darker still. 5 more feet to the front door. 3 feet. 1. My hand touched the doorknob, cold metal under my sweating palm. Going somewhere? Leonard's voice came from the living room, and every muscle in my body locked up. He was sitting in his armchair in the dark, just sitting there in the shadows, waiting. Like he'd known I'd try exactly this. Like he'd been expecting it. The predator waiting patiently for his prey to make a mistake. The lights flicked on, sudden and blinding. Judith stood at the base of the stairs behind me, blocking that escape route. She was holding something, and it took my eyes a second to adjust and recognize it. A syringe, large, filled with clear liquid. Her face was calm, almost pleasant, like this was a normal interaction. Leonard stood slowly from his chair, and I saw he had something too. His phone, probably ready to call the police and report me as a runaway, as mentally unstable, as dangerous to myself. "We've been very patient with you, Daniel," he said, his voice still carrying that fake friendly tone he'd perfected over 5 years. "Very generous. We took you in when no one else wanted you, gave you a home, food, clothes, everything. And this is how you repay us? Stealing from us? Planning to run away?" I backed toward the kitchen, my mind racing through options. Fight? I was bigger than them now, even if most of that size was fat instead of muscle. But Judith had a syringe, Leonard had his phone, and I didn't know what I was capable of. "I know about the insurance policy," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, even though my whole body was shaking. "I know what you've been doing to me. I know everything." Judith laughed, actually laughed, a sound that was genuinely amused. "And who exactly are you going to tell? The police? Help, my foster parents feed me too much? They'll think you're delusional. We have years of documentation showing you're troubled, mentally unstable, prone to paranoid delusions. We've been very careful, Daniel. Very thorough." Leonard moved closer, taking slow steps like he was approaching a skittish animal. "We've built a perfect record. Every doctor's visit documented, every behavioral issue noted, every medication prescribed by a licensed physician. You're an unstable foster child with a history of problems, and we're the saints who took you in despite everything. Now, you're going to be reasonable. You're going to go back upstairs, take your medication like a good boy, and stop this foolish rebellion. We can forget this happened. We can go back to normal." Normal meant them slowly killing me. Normal meant another 2 or 3 months of being fattened and medicated until my body gave out. Normal meant dying, so they could collect $2 million and move on to their next victim. I grabbed the knife block from the kitchen counter, the heavy wooden block that held Judith's cooking knives, and hurled it at Leonard with all the strength I had. Not the knives themselves. I didn't want to stab him, didn't want to be a killer. Just the whole block, heavy and solid. It hit him square in the chest, and he stumbled backward, caught off guard, the air whooshing out of him. I didn't wait to see if he was okay. I ran for the back door, my size making me slow, but also giving me momentum that was hard to stop once I got moving. Judith tried to grab my arm as I passed, and I shoved her, harder than I meant to, and she fell backward against the wall. The syringe clattered to the floor, and I saw her face transform from fake concern to genuine rage. The back door was locked with a deadbolt. My fingers fumbled with it. Too large and clumsy, while behind me Leonard recovered and started charging toward me. "Daniel, stop this right now. You'll freeze out there. Be reasonable." I got the lock open. The door swung wide. Cold March air hit my face, shocking after the warmth of the house. I was through the door and into the backyard, into the night, wearing only a t-shirt and sweatpants because I hadn't thought about grabbing a jacket, hadn't thought about anything except escape. My backpack was still on my shoulders at least, its weight grounding me. I ran for the fence at the back of their property, the old wooden fence that bordered the woods beyond. Behind me, I could hear Leonard yelling, "Daniel, stop! You'll hurt yourself, come back!" And Judith on the phone, her voice sharp as she called someone, police probably. Reporting a mentally unstable foster child running away, dangerous to himself, possibly violent. They'd spin this. They'd make me the villain. But I didn't care because all that mattered was getting away, putting distance between me and them, surviving long enough to find help. I hit the fence and tried to climb it, grabbing the top and pulling, but my weight made it impossible. I couldn't lift myself. My arms, weak from years of inactivity, couldn't support 300 pounds. Leonard was almost on me. I could hear his footsteps pounding across the grass. So I did the only thing I could think of. I threw my full weight against the fence, again and again, using my body as a battering ram. The old wood splintered and groaned. I hit it a third time and felt it give way, boards cracking and splitting. I crashed through into the woods on the other side, branches tearing at my face and arms, roots catching at my feet. Behind me, I could hear Leonard cursing, hear Judith on the phone giving a description. 17 years old, obese, wearing gray sweatpants and a blue t-shirt. He's not well. He's off his medications. He might hurt himself. Please, you have to find him. I pushed deeper into the woods, using my phone's dim light to see, though I had to be careful not to drain the battery. The woods were dense here, underbrush thick and tangled. Every step was agony. Branches whipped at my face, leaving stinging cuts. My lungs burned, struggling to pull in enough air. My knees felt like they were grinding bone on bone. But terror is a powerful motivator, and I kept moving because stopping meant capture, and capture meant death. I had no idea where I was going. The woods behind the Holloway's house connected to a nature preserve. I knew that much from when they'd first taken me here 5 years ago. Miles of trails used by hikers and bikers during the day. If I could make it to the main road on the other side of the preserve, I could hitch a ride or walk to the bus station in the next town over. It was only 5 miles according to the park map I'd seen once. 5 miles that felt like 500 when every step was torture. An hour in, I had to stop, had to lean against a tree and catch my breath, my whole body shaking with exhaustion and cold. The March night was colder than I'd anticipated, probably in the low 40s, and my t-shirt was soaked with sweat despite the freezing temperature. The sweat was making me even colder, creating a feedback loop that was dangerous. I was hypothermic already. I could feel it in the way my thoughts were getting slower, my movements more clumsy. I checked my phone. Battery at 23%. No signal out here in the woods. I'd been heading generally east based on the position of the moon, hoping that would take me toward the main road, but I could be completely wrong. I forced myself to keep moving, used my phone light sparingly, only when I absolutely needed to see obstacles. Concentrated on putting one foot in front of the other. Tried not to think about what would happen if I didn't make it out of these woods, if they found me frozen to death come morning. Would the Holloways still collect on the policy? Would my death in the woods count as natural causes or accident? These were the kinds of thoughts that filled my head as I stumbled through the darkness, my body shutting down degree by degree. 2 hours later, I was lost and on the verge of collapse. The March night had gotten even colder, probably dipping into the 30s. My t-shirt was soaked with sweat despite the freezing temperature, and I couldn't stop shivering. My phone battery was at 12%. I'd been following what I thought was a trail, but it had petered out half an hour ago, leaving me stumbling through underbrush in the dark. My legs were shaking, my vision blurring at the edges. This is how I die, I thought with strange clarity. Not from whatever the Holloways had planned, the slow poisoning, the medical complications, the convenient heart attack. I'd die from exposure, from my own escape attempt, from being too fat and too weak and too desperate to save myself properly. But at least I'd die free. At least they wouldn't profit from my death. Then I heard it, distant but unmistakable. A car engine, the sound of traffic on a road. I changed direction, following the sound with renewed desperation, pushing through my body's protests. The trees started thinning. I could see lights ahead, distant but real. Headlights moving along a road. I'd made it. I pushed through the last line of trees and stumbled onto the shoulder of a 2-lane highway, my legs finally giving out completely. I collapsed onto the gravel at the roadside, every muscle in my body screaming, my lungs heaving. A car passed without stopping. Then another. I must have looked like exactly what I was, a morbidly obese teenager, covered in scratches and dirt and blood from the branches, soaked with sweat, sitting on the side of a dark road in the middle of the night. The kind of situation people speed past because they don't want to get involved, don't want to deal with whatever tragedy or danger this represents. But the third car, an old pickup truck with a dented bumper, slowed down. Stopped. A man in his 60s with a weathered face and kind eyes leaned out the window. "You okay, son?" he asked, and I almost cried at the simple kindness in his voice, the genuine concern. "I need help," I managed through chattering teeth. "Please, I need help." He got out of the truck, assessed me with shrewd eyes that had clearly seen plenty in his years, and made a decision. "Can you get in the truck?" he asked. I could, barely, with his help. He supported some of my weight as I heaved myself up into the passenger seat, every movement agony. The truck's heater was on, and the blast of warm air made me gasp. He got back in the driver's seat, cranked the heat even higher, and handed me a blanket from behind the seat. "Name's Walter," he said, putting the truck in gear. "You running from something or toward something?" His voice was matter-of-fact, non-judgmental. "Both," I said, my teeth still chattering. He nodded like that made perfect sense, and started driving. Walter didn't ask many questions during the 40-minute drive to Chicago, which I appreciated because I didn't have the energy for detailed explanations. He did stop at a 24-hour diner along the way, bought me coffee and a breakfast sandwich, and watched me devour it despite everything the Holloways had done to poison my relationship with food. The coffee was weak and the sandwich was mediocre, but it was the best thing I'd ever tasted because it was freely given, no manipulation attached. "You got somewhere to go in the city?" he asked when we got back in the truck. I didn't. "There's a youth shelter on West Madison," he said. "Place called New Horizons. Good people run it. They'll help you figure things out, no questions asked. He drove me there, right to the door, waited while I got out. Then he handed me a $50 bill through the window. For whatever you need, he said. Good luck, Daniel. I hadn't told him my name. He must have seen it on my backpack, or maybe on my phone screen, or maybe he was just the kind of person who paid attention. I watched him drive away. This complete stranger who'd shown me more genuine kindness in an hour than the Holloways had in 5 years. The shelter was still open, lights on in the windows despite it being nearly 4 a.m. I walked up to the door on legs that barely worked, pushed it open, and stepped into warmth and light. A woman sat at the front desk, middle-aged with tired but kind eyes. She looked up at me, and her expression shifted from routine to concerned in seconds. "Oh, honey," she said, standing up. "What happened to you?" Her name was Patricia, and she saved my life in a different way than Walter had. She got me immediate medical attention, a doctor who examined my scratches, my joints, took my blood pressure and blood sugar, and looked grim at the results. "You're in rough shape," he said gently. "Blood pressure's through the roof. Blood sugar's pre-diabetic. Your joints are damaged, but you're here now. You're safe now. We can work on all of that." Patricia contacted an emergency social worker, not Mr. Phillips, but someone from a crisis intervention team. Her name was Grace, and she was young and intense and actually listened when I started talking. Actually believed me when I told her everything, every detail spilling out in a flood of words I couldn't control. "Do you have any proof?" Grace asked gently when I'd finished, when I'd told her about the insurance policy and the feeding and the medications and the overheard conversations. I pulled out my laptop with shaking hands, showed her the photos I'd taken, the insurance policy, my birth certificate and documents from the Holloway's filing cabinet. Some screenshots I'd managed to take of Leonard's spreadsheets one time when he'd left his computer unlocked. Her face went white as she scrolled through them. "Stay here," she said, her voice tight. "Don't go anywhere. I'm calling the police, the real police, not just for a runaway report. Fraud division." Within hours, I was sitting in an interview room at a police station, giving a statement to Detective Maria Kowalski. She was in her 40s, sharp-eyed and serious, specialized in financial crimes. She listened to everything, took detailed notes, asked questions that proved she understood exactly what had happened to me. "The insurance policy is a good start," she said when I'd finished, "but we need more to make charges stick. We need medical records. We need financial records from them. We need evidence of intent. And most of all, we need you to be willing to testify if this goes to trial." I nodded. I'd do whatever it took. "Then we're going to need warrants," she said, picking up her phone. "And we're going to need to move fast before they destroy evidence." Within 2 days, there were search warrants executed. The Holloway's house was raided by police. Their computers were seized, their files confiscated, their carefully maintained documentation of my destruction boxed up and taken into evidence. And that's when they found everything, more than even I had known about. Judith's detailed logs of my weight gain, tracking every pound with notes about diet adjustments. Leonard's spreadsheets calculating return on investment, timing optimal payout scenarios based on when I'd likely die. Emails between them discussing the project and the asset, me, though they never used my name, keeping everything in code in case someone stumbled across their correspondence. Correspondence with Dr. Rourke, proving he'd been complicit, prescribing medications specifically designed to increase my appetite and decrease my metabolism. Records of similar schemes they'd attempted before, in other states under slightly different names, with other foster children who'd never escaped. I wasn't their first. I was just the first one who'd gotten away. 2 of their previous foster children had died. Natural causes, according to death certificates signed by complicit doctors. Obesity-related complications. Heart failure. Diabetic coma. The insurance companies had paid out hundreds of thousands of dollars. The Holloways had collected, mourned publicly as tragic victims of circumstance, and moved on to the next state, the next identity, the next victim. They'd been running this scheme for over a decade. I'd been their 6th target. 4 were dead. 1 other had aged out of the system before they could complete their plan. And then there was me. The story exploded across media, local news first, then national, then international. Foster parents accused of fattening children for insurance fraud. The headlines were sensational but accurate. The Holloways were arrested within a week, both charged with attempted murder, insurance fraud, conspiracy, child endangerment, medical abuse, and a dozen other counts. They tried to make bail, but the judge denied it, calling them flight risks and dangers to society. The evidence against them was overwhelming. A paper trail so detailed, it was like they'd been building their own prosecution case. Their lawyer tried to claim I was a troubled teen, making false accusations, that my paranoia and mental instability, documented in all those reports Dr. Rourke had filed, made me an unreliable witness. But the paper trail destroyed that defense. Everything was documented because they'd been so confident, so certain they'd never be caught. Every medication, every dollar spent on food, every pound I'd gained, tracked with scientific precision, every email discussing timeline and payout and how to make it look natural. The prosecution had everything they needed. Dr. Rourke lost his medical license before the trial even started and turned state's evidence in exchange for a reduced sentence. He testified that Leonard had approached him 8 years ago with the scheme, had paid him substantial amounts to participate, had threatened him when he'd tried to back out. 3 other complicit doctors were identified in other states, all similarly compromised. The scheme had been elaborate, well-funded, carefully planned, and it had worked 4 times before I'd finally broken the pattern. The trial lasted 6 weeks and was a media circus. Reporters camped outside the courthouse. True crime podcasts covered every detail. I testified for 2 days, walking the jury through every meal, every medication, every lie. The prosecutor, Amanda Strauss, built an airtight case. She showed them the spreadsheets, read aloud their emails, played recordings the police had obtained through wiretaps during the investigation, of Leonard and Judith discussing how to accelerate my decline, how to make my death look natural enough to avoid investigation. These people, Strauss told the jury in her closing, treated children like livestock, like investments. They took vulnerable kids from the system, kids who had no one, and they weaponized food. They weaponized medicine. They weaponized love itself, for money, for profit. They are not parents. They are predators. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Both of them. Leonard got 40 years. Judith got 35. They'd be old before they ever saw freedom again. The insurance companies sued to recover the payouts from the previous cases. The families of the dead children sued. I received a substantial settlement, compensation for what had been done to me. So did Rebecca, the one other survivor who came forward, and the families of the 4 who hadn't made it. I used my settlement money for medical care, therapy, surgery to help with the excess skin after I lost weight. It took 3 years, but I got down to a healthy size. Learned to have a normal relationship with food, though some days are still harder than others. Finished high school through online classes. Started community college studying social work. Rebecca and I stayed in touch, bonded by our shared trauma. She's thriving now, engaged and planning a wedding. The shelter helped me find a real foster placement with a woman named Diane, who treated me like a human being. 4 years after I found that insurance policy, I'm 21, sitting in a college classroom, preparing to help kids like me. My body still carries the evidence, the stretch marks, the joint problems, the scars. But I'm alive. I'm free. And the Holloways are in prison where they belong, their names synonymous with evil. 2 other families running similar schemes were caught because of my case. And me? I'm learning that survival isn't just escaping. It's what you build after. They wanted me to die for $2 million. Instead, I'm living, and that's the best revenge I could ever ask for. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.